Hello everyone, my name is Ollie and I'm a second year medical student at the University of Warwick. So breaking bad news stations in an interview are a fantastic way of seeing basically how a candidate is going to cope under a very stressful or difficult situation. You'll normally be given a scenario to try and work through, so that might be something like talking to a patient in the emergency department. The ECG that you've just had suggests that you've just had a heart attack, or maybe you saw your neighbour's young child get hit by a car and it's your job to go and tell them. Obviously these are extreme examples, but the idea is often similar. It has to be something difficult or stressful enough to make you as the candidate uncomfortable. I'm actually going to cheat a little bit with this video because normally what I try and do is gear these videos towards people that have never been to medical school at all and try and keep everything as far away from actual academic knowledge as possible. But since coming to medical school and having dealt with a few of these situations myself, I've learned about a model called SPIKES. It's a 6-step model that allows you to tackle dealing with difficult situations like this and delivering difficult pieces of information. So even though obviously you guys facing your interviews are not yet in medical school, it's the model you will learn probably once you get here anyway, and I think it's actually a great way to tackle these interview stations. A lot of the same principles still work. So the last thing to say before we begin is that, as with most interview stations, they will not be expecting probably any medical content or knowledge from you at all. The point of these stations is to just see, are you able to handle the stress and still communicate properly when placed in a difficult situation? That's the focus here. So as I said, we're going to work through SPIKES. The first letter of SPIKES is S, and S stands for setting. Obviously in your interview, the setting is not something you're going to have control over, but normally what it means is if you're going to deliver some news to a patient, you'd want to take them to a nice, quiet, private space with ideally no obstacles between you and the patient. It's got to be an open discussion. You actually might want to move or rotate your chair if that makes it more comfortable or more appropriate to face the patient. You should be able to do that. And just things like having open body language, having a box of tissues ready if the patient is likely to cry. There may actually be a box of tissues in your interview, so watch out for that if the patient does cry. And in a clinical setting, you'd also need to be aware of who else was in the room with you. So even though the patient's family might be visiting them, the patient might not have told the family exactly what's wrong with them. It might be intimate information, or just information they're not comfortable with their family knowing. So if there is someone else in the room, be sure that the patient is okay to have them in there when you have this conversation. You can ask them to leave. P stands for perception, and in this part you're going to assess what the patient perceives to actually be going on. What do they understand about the situation? And that's the first thing really you should establish. What does the patient think has happened? Do they know why you're there? Do they have any idea what you're going to tell them? P is for perception, that is to say understanding what the patient perceives to be going on. One of the most useful things you can do at this stage is simply ask the patient to recap what their understanding of the situation is and what's happened to them so far. You can also work out how they're feeling at this point, even before you deliver the news, and see what it is that they are expecting you to tell them. Do they understand why you're even there? And this way, before you even have to approach delivering your news, you'll already be scoring points for being compassionate, understanding, and taking it at a pace determined by the patient. So establishing whether they're prepared for the news you're about to deliver will kind of bring you on into the next section. The I stands for invitation. Before you can deliver the news, the patient must actively invite you to deliver it to them. You can't just do it with the patient unprepared. In a clinical setting, this would basically be whether the patient wants those results now or whether they want some time to kind of think about what's happened. Obviously, in the setting of your interview, they're invariably going to want the results now. You don't really have time to sit and wait. But you should still ask anyway, because again, it places the patient in control of the difficult situation, and that is one of the things that's going to keep scoring you points. So the big section now where things actually happen, K is for knowledge. You delivering the knowledge that you have of the situation to the patient. If it's a complex scenario with lots of little bits, you may want to break it down into smaller segments, and you should continuously be checking that the patient understands what you've told them so far. If possible, I think it's a good idea to start with a warning sentence. So in the case of the A&E ECG example that I gave in the introduction, so you could say something like, The medical team in the emergency department did a kind of test called an ECG on you, which looks at your heart, and it showed a concerning result. So obviously there, you haven't even said any part of the news itself, but you've subconsciously prepared the patient to receive some bad news. Even with the child example I gave, you could say something like, I was walking down the road, there was a car accident and a pedestrian was hit. Obviously, again, you've not delivered the exact news yet, but you're preparing the patient because they understand that it's obviously relevant to them in some way. You're preparing them to receive that news. After you've delivered your warning sentence, just be direct, deliver the news as it was given to you. You don't need to embellish, soften anything, just say what you were given to say. And then the really important thing to do is not say anything. You should wait for the patient to reinitiate conversation with you. This is making sure that you give them time to adequately absorb it, start to process it, and then just kind of let them sit on it. Even if it takes, 30 seconds, I would still argue that's really valuable to do, even in an interview. And the simulated patient in your interview will understand the time dynamics of the station. They may still give you that very genuine feeling reaction, so just let them get on with it and do it. Wait for them to reinitiate conversation and then move on. To E, which is for emotions or empathy, depending on exactly which guide you read. This is about letting the patient have their reaction and you understanding their reaction as the practitioner. You need to be able to recognize people's emotional responses and then act accordingly. This is going to mean not just listening to what they say, you're looking at more general things like facial expression, body language, just the feeling in the room. And it's at this point that the patient, if they have questions, is probably going to start unloading them on you. Now, if you've been given further information to provide in your station prompt, then at this point you can provide it if it's appropriate, but always err on the side of caution. Never guarantee anything, don't make any promises, just say everyone, is doing their best. I can refer you to someone who might be able to answer your questions more fully, but I myself don't know the answer and wouldn't be authorized to give it to you. You need to be able to recognize people's emotional responses and then act accordingly. This is going to mean not just listening to what they say, you're looking at more general things like facial expression, body language, just the feeling in the room. And it's at this point that the patient, if they have questions, is probably going to start unloading them on you. Now, if you've been given further information to provide in your station prompt, then at this point you can provide it if it's appropriate, but always err on the side of caution. Never guarantee anything, don't make any promises. When in doubt in these kind of situations, the safest thing to do is just say, look, I'm sorry, I'm not suitably qualified, I don't know the answer, and I wouldn't want to mislead you with something that was wrong. We can always refer to one of the other medical team, one of the doctors or the nurses, who might be able to better answer your question and get you the help you want. And that's a kind of cover-all answer. No one can complain at that. That's usually the kind of answer that I would give on the wards as a medical student if someone asks me something that I'm not suitably qualified to answer. That's kind of what you're told to do. Lastly, in this case, S is going to be for summary. In a clinical setting, it would be for strategy, but that involves planning the patient's management, and in your interview, you certainly won't be doing that. Simply check the patient's understanding of the situation once more, and just be sure that everything is moving as it should. You might have been given some materials like a leaflet on heart attacks or something like that. You can always provide them at this stage because you're preparing to break away from the patient and let them get on with their own thing. You can always ask the patient how they want to proceed, but at this point it's unlikely you're going to be doing anything further. So thank them for their time, thank them for listening to you. You can always check if they have any final questions at this point, which again you might refer to another member of the healthcare team. Other than that, a smile wouldn't go amiss, shake their hand if they offer it to you, and you can end the meeting there. But always thank the patient. That's a good point scorer, even when you get to medical school. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Please be sure to hit that like button for me, leave a comment, subscribe. Don't forget to go and check out PostGradMedic.com for my blog of life here at medical school and a load of other helpful videos like this. Take care, and I'll see you next time.